Thank you for joining me. I'm Gord Long. A reminder before we begin, do not trade from any of these slides. They're commentary for educational and discussion purposes only. Always consult a professional financial advisor before making any investment decisions. As we have well documented, the U.S. faces unprecedented economic and financial challenges as the national fiscal debt soars seemingly out of control. However, there is a solution if the U.S. is to take bold and decisive action. The window is rapidly closing, however. The time's short and the risks are not insignificant, but it is possible. The U.S. must implement a national policy approach that will place it on the path to delivering a sustainable competitive advantage for the nation. This sustainable competitive advantage must deliver performance that will be consistently better than its competitors over the longer term. This sustainable competitive advantage must have unique strengths that will be difficult for competitors to replicate. This subject is important enough that we will do it in a two-part series accompanied by expanded materials in our weekly newsletter. Hopefully, this effort will aid you in building an investment portfolio that will likewise perform and the results also being sustainable. In part one, we will cover the areas outlined here, where we will focus on what and why something must be done, as well as what it will take. In part two, we will focus on how it can be done. The approach is different than anything previously attempted by the U.S., but actually builds on what is already in place, but which needs to be properly organized, structured, and financed. We'll start with reinforcing some critical understandings and appreciation of what strategists call the situational analysis. You have likely seen this slide before, showing the growth of the U.S. national debt in red versus the U.S. economic GDP growth in turquoise. You'll notice the inflection point at the bottom of the chart marking the increasing rate of growth of the national debt in 2000 as a consequence of the implosion of the dot-com bubble and the monetary reflation of the economy at that time. You can see after the 2008 financial crisis, the U.S. was forced to implement a whole new untested monetary process dubbed quantitative easing or QE. Both assisted in keeping the U.S. from falling into a very serious economic depression. At its core, the U.S. faces two central issues. First, the U.S. consumes more than it produces and has for decades, resulting in increasingly destabilizing global twin U.S. deficit funding bleeds. Secondly, the U.S. deficit spending no longer generates the GDP growth it once did. Specifically, debt growth no longer produces economic growth at a sufficient rate. What is happening now that few seem to realize is that the era of Keynesian stimulus growth is over. Specifically, in the U.S., it now takes as much as $2.50 of new debt to produce $1 of economic growth. In the U.S., it now takes as much as $1.50 of deficit growth to produce $1 of economic growth. Velocity of money has become chronically smaller than money supply growth, resulting in further GDP headwinds. The latest Q4 GDP reports those numbers have deteriorated even further. In Q4, it actually took $5.80 of debt to generate a single dollar of GDP growth. For the whole year of 2014, it took $3.90 of debt to generate a single dollar of GDP growth. When I heard the newly elected German government announce earlier this week that they will immediately initiate fiscal deficit spending to reignite the troubled German economy, I found it astounding how poorly educated and outdated the political class has become. Each of the two U.S. problems require a different approach, but most critically need to be implemented in concert with each other. The solution to problem one is that the U.S. must rapidly reindustrialize. The U.S. lost 54,000 manufacturing facilities after China's World Trade Organization entry in 2002. We went through massive offshoring, downsizing, and right-sizings, for those that remember, and attempts to halt this exit, but it was too little too late. That exit did not halt, and we have now lost over 70,000 manufacturing facilities. If we only achieved returning 5% of that 70,000, that's 3,500 new facilities. The numbers are astounding, frankly. Even with new technology, we keep losing manufacturing facilities and jobs. I witnessed a major sailboat manufacturing, as an example, in Rhode Island convert to manufacturing wind turbine blades. The company hit the market perfectly, and the growth was well needed in the area. With the business growing, they then shut down the entire operation and moved it to Mexico. The problem the U.S. faced then is still well with us. I've already done a couple of videos on this subject, which I will leave our new subscribers to review. What I want to address in this video is how does the U.S. address problem number 2? How does the U.S. create sustainable economic growth in an increasingly highly competitive global world economy? Currently, U.S. exceptionalism abounds, but is it sustainable? As DeepSeek recently illustrated, technology leadership can change abruptly with breakthrough new approaches and discoveries. This is to be expected. In fact, the U.S. must become the disruptor, not the disrupted. We might want to take a step back and look at how strategy and industrial capture has been working for the last 40 to 50 years, which I've often referred to as a modern mercantilist strategy, which has to be overcome. This form of mercantilism was initiated by Japan in the late 70s and then tuned further by China in the new millennium. How it works is a competitive country sells competitively priced products into the U.S. in an attempt to capture market share. They can do this in a fair fashion because they have an advantage such as labor costs, or they can do it unfairly through techniques such as dumping, state financing, minimal profit and return on equity targets, or other creatively disguised trade policies. The competitive country then returns the profits to the U.S. to buy U.S. bonds. The U.S. bond demand drives down interest rates. Lower interest rates means consumers can borrow more to consume, and suddenly we have a U.S. economy that's 70% consumption driven. Then, them also holding growing currency reserves in U.S. dollars, they also strengthen the U.S. dollar, giving them an exchange advantage on their products. Without stopping this cycle, a competitive country can eventually bleed a target country dry, despite the rules or apparent enforcement of the World Trade Organization. This is what has been steadily happening to the U.S. Today, increasingly, Asia and China specifically are being forced from just being the low-cost provider as their labor costs rise to moving up the value ladder to higher-priced products, which traditionally pay higher salary levels. There are plenty of countries already further squeezing the low end. Moving up the value ladder is not speculative, but the articulated strategy of China's Xi Jinping. This is a major threat to the developed nations, which former Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen specifically made a trip to China to discuss the global ramifications of. Her arguments fell on deaf ears. I need to get a little tough here in my comments because the harsh reality is exactly that. And never underappreciate that the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, is effectively an organized crime organization. It is neither elected nor supported by the people. It holds power solely through force. China plays its own rules. China's not a competitor. In reality, it's the enemy. It is China who has made it extremely clear in state media that they are at war with the U.S. and preparing for war with the U.S. That's a fact. That's not speculation. As a consequence, Trump finally brought the hammer down officially last Friday, February 21st, with 2 executive memorandums strongly directed at China. These presidential memorandums reverse many of the Biden's executive orders, including preferred nation status for China and the cancellation of the Department of Justice China Initiative. Just to highlight a few of the key directives, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States will be used to restrict Chinese investments in strategic U.S. sectors like technology, critical infrastructure, healthcare, agriculture, energy, raw materials, and others. The United States will protect farmland and real estate that is near sensitive facilities, strengthening the CFIUS authority over greenfield investments and restrict foreign adversary access to U.S. talent and operations in sensitive technologies. The U.S. will establish new rules to curb exploitation of its capital technology and a knowledge by foreign adversaries such as China to ensure that only those investments that serve American interests are allowed. The Trump administration will consider new or expanded restrictions in U.S. outbound investment to China in sensitive technologies including semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum, biotech, aerospace, and more, to stop American funds from supporting China's military civil fusion or MCF strategy. China is exploiting our capital and ingenuity to fund and modernize their military, intelligence, and security operation, posing direct threats to the United States security with weapons of mass destruction, cyber warfare, and more. Chinese hackers have repeatedly targeted U.S. entities, including recently breaching the Treasury Department's CIUS office, specifically the entity responsible for reviewing foreign investments for national security risks. It goes on, including further directives in the second executive memorandum encouraging foreign investment while protecting national security loopholes that are blatantly being taken advantage of, to great disadvantage to America. Many of these directives are intended to stop what has already been happening, which is allowing the industrial capture of U.S. industries. A prime example of the mistakes being made can be seen with the recent spat under the Biden administration concerning U.S. steel. In 2022, China built 800 commercial ships, while America built just one. Ships take a lot of steel to produce, and this sort of demand shortfall is the sort of thing that forces U.S. steel to be in play for a foreign takeover. You can't maintain being a great nation if you can't cost-effectively produce your own steel. The Biden administration didn't see the takeover of U.S. steel as a threat to national security. Meanwhile, the Congressional Budget Office released its independent analysis of the U.S. Navy shipbuilding plan, warning that the number of battle force ships will decrease from 295 today to 283 ships in 2027, reducing the fleet's firepower. The CBO predicted that over the next 30 years, the national shipyards would need to produce substantially more naval tonnage than they have produced over the past 10 years. The rate of production of nuclear-powered submarines in particular would need to be increased significantly. The Shipyard Accountability Workforce Support, SAWS is what it was referred to, initiative would have allowed the U.S. shipbuilders to invest in their workforce and suppliers, stem the rising cost of submarine production through technological innovation, and allow 17 more boats to be built. SAWS achieved this by using taxpayer dollars more effectively without having to appropriate another nickel. SAWS was seen to represent an immediate and comprehensive approach to revitalizing American shipbuilding on day one. It was seen to provide wage increases to 45,000 shipyard workers across the nation while smartly using authorities in the 2025 National Defense Authorization Act to fund both these wages and critical cutting-edge shipyard technology, helping our major prime contractors to build faster, smarter, and more effectively. Through streamlined processes that will speed up ship and submarine production, along with careful resource management, SAWS projected to save taxpayers over $20 billion while strengthening our industrial base, and had a real chance to both fix our current issues and take technology-driven manufacturing leap over the CCP ahead of a looming 2025 Pacific timeline. Why do I bring this up? Because the Biden administration nixed the whole SAWS program. Instead, Biden asked Congress for an additional $6 trillion, a Band-Aid to fix the problem, further increasing the national debt. What was needed? In his first week, President Trump picked up the ball the outgoing administration had dropped and sent a signal to the CCP that he will not wait to rebuild Americans' manufacturing strength. This is an example of the magnitude of change that must happen. What we needed was the leadership that understands the urgency of our challenge and is willing to take bold actions to restore being the world's industrial superpower and ensure that the 21st century remains an American century. President Trump's pick for Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, recognized the urgent need for shipbuilding in his confirmation hearing specifically, signaling industrialization as a top priority of the next administration. In short, we need many more ships, and we need to build them now. This week, Trump met with the newly elected Prime Minister of Japan and agreed to an investment partnership with Japan with U.S. Steel, U.S. controlled in the United States workers helping being funded by Japan. There was also another recent national security brouhaha regarding Chinese-owned TikTok, another example of our problem. TikTok captured the U.S. youth audience quietly, almost overnight. Industrial capture had already worked and was growing. As a Chinese-controlled product, TikTok was only then recognized as a threat to the U.S. for national security reasons. It was in the process of being banned from the U.S. when Trump's actions on the first day of his presidency were instructive, especially since he initially was recognized for flagging the issue and then raising it with the Biden administration. What Trump did is he extended the Biden ban by 75 days to allow the Trump administration and the Chinese-based owner ByteDance the opportunity to restructure with a 51% controlled U.S. ownership and firm control of the operating algorithms, therefore removing the Chinese threat. Just another example of different approaches, but a more bolder and a more encompassing approach. The AI industry was given a Sputnik shock moment with China's DeepSeek making its announcement recently. Suddenly, China's DeepSeek changed the rules regarding CapEx expenditures for data centers, total costs, and time to market for AI. Potential leapfrog technology is the name of the AI arms race. The Chinese high-tech sector has exploded higher in the last few weeks. I featured this in our newsletters and technical reports. Studies by Goldman Sachs Global Investment Research has shown that the global adoption of AI, which is expected to significantly boost labor productivity, will also drive economic growth, potentially leading to substantial increases in GDP. This is a game of productivity through the adoption of application usage. This is a war you play to win. It is more important than the short-term profit game. It is about productivity, innovation, and disruption. It must be seen as a modern-day arms race. It's a war that no country can lose because it's more important than profits. You have to play that war to win, not for profits. The Chinese are a bit behind in chips, but they are ahead in the applications. The Chinese play is going to be chips, very inexpensive chips, embedded in manufacturing goods. The Chinese produce more. The Chinese are unbelievably good at making things inexpensively. They own 33% of all world manufacturing goods, which is more than the combined U.S., German, and Japanese manufacturing goods combined. You will see application, robotics, androids, that is new terminals, and humanoid technology very quickly. Large-scale beachheads, on the other hand, are being announced regularly here in the United States to counter this. Alibaba just announced plans with Trump for 1 million new jobs. Were announced by Jack Ma, the head of Alibaba. Announced Alibaba's expansion would focus on products like garments, wine, and fruits, with a special focus on trade between the American Midwest and Southeast Asia. Alibaba is also splashing more cash with additional plans to spend more than $53 billion on AI infrastructure in the U.S. Last week, Apple announced plans to invest $500 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years. Apple plans to hire an additional 20,000 workers in the production of AI servers. President Trump's tariffs on goods imported from China are probably a major catalyst behind this move. We're seeing a shift in thinking, but it's part of a plan. Currently, Trump's focus on tariffs is hinting at the fact he has designs on reshoring a large amount of the foreign auto industry. Trump was elected on delivering job growth. The automotive jobs are the low-hanging fruit. The primary targets, Canada, Mexico, and EU. 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum is where you start. It's the basic building blocks of the automotive industry. Bring those jobs, or some of those jobs, back to America. What you're seeing with these recent examples are glimpses of an unfolding national industrial policy yet to be articulated. One thing America had reinforced to it during the Cold War with the USSR is that centralized planning has never proven to work, other than possibly in war. Maybe the U.S. isn't at war with China, technically, but the U.S. does need a better strategy, or minimally a coordinated industrial strategy. Biden demonstrated with the mandated implementation of climate change programs and the new Green Deal that governments can be counted on to simply throw money at a problem with terribly flawed implementation plans, like full-scale EV automotive direction, completely unsupported by a national network of charging stations. Minimally, what we should have done is incented and planned a planned hybrid bridge that may have been more practical. We didn't do any of this. The U.S. has found that organic growth by industry based on pure research efforts funded by the government has proven somewhat better and more effective, DARPA being the best example. Unfortunately, it's slow. It takes way too long, and that is something we don't have. Is there a better hybrid solution? The answer is yes. And it's about a modern solution through investment-driven partnerships, shared risk, shared rewards. It's about an investment-driven and research-funded approach. A strategic investment-driven industrial policy is about harnessing investment and not government spending. Government money is a part of the investment and not an expenditure. That is, it has a definable potential payout. The good news is the target areas are underway with established U.S. leadership. The goal today is not picking the area, but rather accelerating the biggest potential areas. The better the horse performs, the more races you enter him in. When his performance lag, you go to your stable. The U.S. has a big stable of racehorses ready to compete and competing. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, biotech, nanotech, renewable energy, neurosciences, humanoid robotics, and the list goes on. So, in the past, during the space race against Russia, in 1957, Russia had launched the Sputnik satellite. It was an abrupt wake-up call to America. The United States responded a year later with the creation of NASA. In the next 3 decades, the U.S. invested so aggressively in missile technology that Russia simply couldn't keep up. Russia went bankrupt and collapsed. The U.S. maintained its global preeminence for another 60 years. The AI arms race is on, and it's against China. China leads in 5G technology, which is a major issue. China just set the world on edge with DeepSeek, with no response from the United States yet. Chinese technology leaders are seeking and exploiting stock prices from global investment. Why is this a second American strategic imperative? Made in China 2025, Stage 1 of China's 3-stage state-led program with the ultimate aim of China becoming the leading manufacturing power by 2041 helps explain it. It established 9 priority tasks. These are listed here. Improving manufacturing innovation, all the way through to internationalizing manufacturing. It includes 10 key sectors to be promoted, and they would be next-generation information technology, high-end numerical machinery and robots, aerospace and equipment, all things right down to the last, biopharmaceuticals and high-performance medical devices, all of which we, the United States, currently are in leadership positions of, but losing quickly or will lose quickly unless they're harnessed properly and funded appropriately. The problem is fundamentally America is underinvesting in a major way. The U.S. invested 8 times or 800% more in R&D than China in 2000, 25 years ago. In 2017, 17 years later, the U.S. only invested 10% more. Chinese R&D investment has grown an average of 17.4% since 2000. U.S. has grown on average of only 4.3%. This suggests that over the last 8 years, since 2017, China has been advancing at a 13.1% annual rate each and every year. China may have already surpassed the U.S. in total R&D expenditures at some point in 2019, according to the National Science Board's Policy Committee. And I quote Joe Biden himself, "We will see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50 years. We've been falling behind in that competition. Decades ago, we used to spend 2% of GDP on R&D. Today, we spend less than 1%. He's absolutely right. We haven't did a thing about it, however. So what will it take? It will take real leadership. What that means, visionary leadership, boldness of quest, and the harnessing of a divided nation. Such a person is unusual. Therefore, we can expect the approach to be unusual. Thinking outside the box takes courage, but the real courage may need to come from the electorate, as changing is very unnerving. It will also take a new way. This is what we'll talk about in part 2. It will require knowing how it can be done. It must be investment-driven, and it employs new methods such as sovereign wealth fund and using new global tools such as cryptocurrencies. Trump said during the campaign he wanted to be the king of crypto. We may soon find out exactly what he meant and planned. He announced the sovereign wealth fund 2 weeks ago, to the excitement of my colleague Richard Duncan, who I already wrote to you about his work and meeting in Washington. We'll discuss this further in the next session, as outlined here. I'd like to take a moment as a reminder. Do not trade from any of these slides. They're for educational and discussion purposes only. As negative as these comments often are, there's actually seldom been a better time for investing. However, it requires careful analysis and not necessarily following what has been the traditional, true, and tried approaches. Do your reading and make sure you have a knowledgeable and well-informed professional financial advisor. So until we talk again, may 2025 turn out to be an outstanding investment year for you and your family. And I sincerely thank you for listening.